Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today and welcome to our session. Couldn't be more timely. Culture change in the AI age. My name is Tim Morton. I'm the president of Prompt AI, and my pronouns are he, him. And I'm thrilled to be with you today to help guide this really important conversation. And I'm so honored and pleased and thrilled to introduce our guest speaker, Phil Buckley, a culture change guru, a change management strategist, a change leader. It goes on, and an author of two outstanding change management books, Change with Confidence and Change on the Run. A great read. So I'm really excited to have Phil share his insights and thought leadership with us today. And Phil, welcome. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Tim. And hi, everybody who's on the line, and also those that will be listening after on demand when it's best for them. And it's great to be here. And Tim, as you said, it's such a timely or an opportune time to discuss not only culture change, but with an AI age, because I think it's with new technology or something new, the enablement factors are tremendous. But then there's also another side of the coin where if it's not implemented well, the best intentions turns into the best forms of resistance. So I'm really excited to dive into this topic right now because I think it's prevalent for all organizations, whether you're private, public, not-for-profit, anywhere in the world. Everyone's going under the same sort of circumstances of how do you bring in AI into your organization to make it the best that it can be? And again, I don't think that there's a definitive way of doing it. So there's very much of a test and learn sort of philosophy right now with at least the early adopters. So let's dive in. It's going to be a great hour, and thank you everyone for joining.
Perfect. And for those of you that are joining, we want to let you know that I've got some questions I'm thinking through, and we'll come up with some questions on the fly. But as you have your questions for Phil, please do put them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll allow time at the end. And one of the things so interesting for me, even as I was reflecting on this the last few days, was for years I've heard people say cultures don't change, people change. And, and I was like, well, I always thought, well, if that's true, then what work is there for leaders and change leaders to provide? So it's been a bit of a it was just something I was reflecting on the last few days. But I think my perspective is we do play a big role, and leaders play a big role, and everybody plays a big role in effectively transforming cultures and enhancing it. And so with that, I'd love to, I'd just love to get your thoughts, Phil, on what is AI in the context of culture change?
Thanks, Tim. And you make a great point. I've heard that before where people say, oh, a culture is a culture, but, cultures are, defined through the people and the work that they do and how they think and how they behave and led by the leaders' examples. So I very much agree that you can change cultures effectively for the benefit of the organization and the people. And I think when we talk about AI, and I'm wondering if you find this as well as the people that are listening in, there's so much media about AI now, what it is, what it isn't. And I think a lot of, it's sort of when something's relatively new within the first 2 years, let's say, I think the headlines tend to go to sensationalism, like, don't worry, you won't lose your job. It's just someone who does AI better will take the job from you. Or, could we have an army of robots? Or, performance management when, half your staff are robots. And I think it plays on people's natural fears of change and the unknown. But I think if you strip it back and say, well, what is AI in regard to culture change? Well, AI is an enabler. It's a tool. It's a productivity tool. It's an efficiency tool. It's a decision-making tool. to help you do better on some of the tasks that we typically would do. And some examples would be, which I think is one of the best ones, which is really taking a look at a lot of data and summarizing it and coming up with great conclusions. There's still an element of, insight and a manage of understanding and context that people will actually contribute to anything that's been AI enabled. But what I'd say to your question is, it's an enabler to develop the culture that you're looking for with the set objectives that you have. Very much an engagement with the team that's doing it in the center, but I think also co-creation with the people that are creating the culture. So it's an enhancement tool. It's an enabler. It's not a silver bullet. It's not something that's going to take away everyone's livelihoods and roles. But used wisely, I think it could be a great enabler and also a competitive advantage.
You're so right. I think that opportunity to have it as a differentiator, a really amazing differentiator, but I think it's so important to get people engaged and on board. And as you said, co-create that future with them and bring them along the journey. And so often we've heard leaders who say, oh, well, it's a good thing. People are going to love it. And and we know it's changed people that's not rooted in reality. We all have our own mechanisms for how to approach change and how to deal with. And we've heard the stories that this is going to be great. It's going to solve everything. And we know, no, it's an enabler. So I think you're just so spot on there.
No, thank you. And it's so interesting, as you say, Tim, that I think when there's again, there's a newness about AI, and there's a sort of a varying degree of understanding of what it is, or even just what it can do, where it really does show a gap between it's a potential knowledge gap, a usage gap, even a philosophical gap of what it is. And I think in that sort of milieu of understanding or misunderstanding or various understandings, it really does lead to fear. But then I think that the point that you make the most that really resonates with me is it's the danger of the glittering prize. It's the danger of the flashy item. It's the flavor of the month. And I think, how many times have we seen in our careers where something that's been really a productivity enhancer, like look at agility, like anything that can enable people to do the work they're supposed to do better, and it's misused, and it's and I think it's the jump in and let's do it, but it's not going to take a lot of support. Just put people on ChatGPT or whatever platform, and we're good to go. And I think that it links into a lot of awareness first before you jump in and want what the benefits are portrayed to be without the work and the support and the environment creation so that you can get those benefits.
Yeah. And I know for me, I've got to stay away from those shiny objects, and I've got to really be planned out. I do need to do my strategic planning, which is always so important. So, and then just thinking about AI and enabling culture change. How can we enable AI and really also at the same time make sure our culture is changing so we get the most out of these enablers?
Yeah, it's such a great question because again, I think to what end is always a good starting point for any change initiative. And I think that's true, if not truer, for culture change. What are we trying to accomplish? What is the gap from where we are now to where we need to be? And then really the change management support is transitioning from where we are to where we need to go. And I think how AI can enable us in culture change is really having a greater understanding of really where we are and where we need to go. And that'd be work. And I know you do so much work in this area, but it is really the data-driven insights that you get from taking a look at data and really coming up with the key patterns, the key themes, the sentiments, which are really, from my perspective, the emotions underlying the comments and the scores that people make. And I think that, we've had a lot of experience doing it manually, and I think we come up with really good outcomes of this is what the data is suggesting to us based on our experience and what the data says to us. But when you get into large data sets, to be able to really discern what are the key trends, like we are only human of flesh and blood. We may, I know for me, I've missed certain things so data-driven insights. And another thing, I think part of that, so that's number one. Number two, I think is the ability to look at information. And again, this is a two-sided coin thing, to really almost get beyond the personal biases that we would have. Now, there's a danger that when they're scraping data from everywhere, it could be highly biased as well. And that's where I think the human element comes in to ensure that doesn't happen. But, so many times, like, I think if you're in a culture, you're part of the benefit, but you're part of the problem of moving to a new culture because you're in it every day. And I've seen leaders and I've seen change people like ourselves or project managers, and they'll look at something, but they have their own biases. And one of the best examples of that was it was a leadership team, and it was for more diversity, equity, and inclusion. And really trying to find the gaps of where we are versus the aspirations of where we want it to be, of total inclusion. And the leadership team almost thought like, hey, I think we're doing okay. But the data, if you're looking at it from someone at a different level, would not have had that conclusion. And I think the leaders were in the environment in which they were in, top of the organization, making all the decisions. And from their perspective, everything's good, but they weren't seeing the intern coming in and having challenges, not being listened to. So that would be the second thing, I think, is just sort of either highlighting or avoiding biases, or presenting information on what they might be for the human to actually take a look at it. The biggest one, I think, Tim, and I'd love to hear your perspectives, is it's targeted change support for taking that organization or the people in it from where they are to where they need to go from a cultural perspective. And I think what I've seen as the beauty of AI is it really does look at different groups and different cuts of the data in a different way. So, you're not looking at, 400 people as a complete one, block of people, but you can break it down by function. You can break it down by other areas. You can break it down by people who have been working here for 2 years versus those who have been working here by 10. And I think what that allows you to do is get more targeted in the support that you'd have. And I think what I think we've seen in our careers, and I'd love to hear your perspective, but one size doesn't fit all for change, and especially not in culture change. And there might be some early adopters, there might be some people that have reasons to resist more than others. So that one size fits all and everyone goes through one training program and we're all set, I think is naive, and I don't think it's effective. So I think what it does is it really helps us look at sort of natural clusters of people and really determine the support that they need in a targeted way to get from where they are now to where they need to go. What are your thoughts on that, Tim?
Well, I was taking some notes because there's a lot for me to unpack. And I think where you started with the data and the sentiment and even came back towards that, I think it really does help us from a culture change perspective. We know that not every we can't boil the ocean, and certainly we don't want to boil the ocean. there's limited resources available, there's limited time, and we've got to show that we're that we're really making progress. And I think as you talked about that targeted change support, it is so important to be able to segment what we're hearing. So segment the sentiment from different groups and understand different intersectionality, and it's so important to get that perspective of everybody, and then to be able to start to really understand what is happening. And change managers do incredible work. We know they do. They're working hard, they're engaging, they're always on. we just need to give them better tools and better insights and better data to elevate their role and actually make sure that what they're sharing with leaders, they can say, hey, you know what? This is what the data is telling us. And it can be done in a non-threatening way as well. This is new data that we're getting from AI. And it's not about from a culture perspective blaming or shaming or naming. It's really, this is new data. What do we do with it, and what actions can we make from it? And it's very, very powerful. And so often in culture change, uh, a lot of times we hear the leaders, what the leader believes is gospel. And what we know when we get information from AI is the leader's got a perspective, and their perspective is valid for them, but there's an opening, again, as you said, that intern and their experience from onboarding, or their experience of how they feel that they're treated within this culture, is incredibly important. And what we can do and what we can understand from AI is just incredible to move everybody forward, but also make sure we got those leaders on board and those people managers that understand what is happening in their area, or a plant manager, what's happening in his area, or a territory manager. It is just absolutely incredible. And that institutional knowledge, along with the AI, is so impactful.
Yeah, Tim, and it's so interesting when, as you were talking, I'd add one more benefit based on what you said, and it was the ability to measure progress for that plant manager, which I think is a beautiful example. Yeah. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but I definitely have. Is you got the plan, let's say it's for a new culture, and you run the plan, but you might get some anecdotal information. Is it working or it's not? But the computation of the data, that you probably don't have a lot of time to do that deep analysis when you're in the midst of implementation. But the ability to pivot if it's not going well, like it's just the messages aren't landing. The messages are poorly constructed for the language of that particular group, whether it's a manufacturing group or whatever, or it's a different country, but it's not working. And I think that lag time of the manual approach of doing it is a killer, because these people are knowing it's not working and nothing's happening, and you don't know it's not working, and you let it ride, and then more inappropriate communication goes out, and then resistance goes up. Where I think is that ability to pivot, and I would even say the transparency with, here's the data, to call it when you made a mistake, and then to reconnect in a different way. If trust is important to your new culture, if transparency is important, if really just testing and learning is important, AI can actually demonstrate how those can be by doing the cultural initiative, if the leadership is serious about doing so.
Yeah. And I think what it calls out to, when we're thinking about culture change, this isn't business as usual, but it's also not change as usual.
Yeah.
This isn't how we're not doing change how we've always done change, where people get frustrated, or it hasn't gone as well, or they haven't felt part of it. This is so not change as usual. And I just want to take you to that one example. We were looking at AI data with this organization across the Americas that had different locations. And one of the things we were seeing was huge anomalies within one location in Denver. And wow. what it was really strange. But because of having conversations and looking at the data, we were able to determine that previously there was a leader in there that was known for bullying and harassing, and the culture became very toxic. And there was a new leader that was now in place, but it hadn't been long enough, and there hadn't been as many steps that could take to change that culture. But we were able to see from AI what people needed in order to start to trust again, in order to start to believe that things were going to be different, that, hey, they were hearing the right words from leadership and people managers, they weren't yet seeing it. So to be able to, along that journey of culture change, to be able to have different tactics for that location was incredibly valuable, that we might not have got without AI.
Excellent. What a great example.
Yeah, yeah, it was. Um, it's I, and you're building trust with those leaders as well, because you're having empathy and you're supporting them as well in their journey and how they're trying to take. So it's all part of that, but you're using data to help inform and better plans. So
Great.
I just want to shift gear for a second, um, and Josh Berslin, uh, he's a research and HR thought leader, said that AI can break down workplace silos. What do you think about that? Because I know that you've dealt with silos everywhere, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. So, he believes that AI can break down workplace silos.
Yeah, interesting. Josh, he's definitely a thought leader, and especially I think with technology and the people agenda. Let's say I think the people agenda is not just HR, but I think it is really that lens through the whole organization. And it's an interesting point about silos, and I kind of think, in any organization, sort of the division of labor into departments, or if you call them functions, is sort of an efficiency and effectiveness approach, that we're doing all of finance within a finance team, and then we'll become specialists with it. And I think it started 100 years ago because of efficiency and effectiveness. And I think the other side of the benefits of having that, and sort of distributed work by function, is that I think silos are a natural output of our organizations. And again, not for profit, public, private. So how do you break it down? And I think what's the danger first of having a silo is, I think it creates micro cultures unto itself. It has its different procedures. It kind of runs on its own. And what I would say is, everything in our digital world, we're cross-cultural, cross-connected by the different functions. Like, there's no functional initiative anymore, because everything's connected with data. And I think what Josh is saying is that, what AI can do is it can actually take data from across all these functions. And just wondering if people are thinking of this now while they're listening, but there's different systems in different ones. Like, it's the HRIS system, you've got your enterprise, system, SAP, Workday, whatever, and they don't necessarily talk, or if they talk, they don't necessarily are integrated. And I think what AI does is it can actually take all of this data and integrate it and analyze it. So you really are actually having patterns of recognition across the organization. And I think one thing that could be really interesting is, are you having insights based on causality between different things? Like, could you say a capability profile would connect to higher performance, or make some sort of argument with it? I don't think our systems right now could make a fair and supportive claim. But I think when you have information crossing everywhere, you're looking at the organization as one organization entity. And I think that's what AI would do. And I think even that benefit that we talked about, Tim, about the ability to distill even different formatted information into conclusions, could be pretty compelling, and to your point, as a competitive advantage.
Yeah.
So I think it's great.
Thank you.
It's blowing up the
Yeah.
whole limitations of how we manage organizations now.
Yeah, and part of what we've been seeing too is, we've been seeing where overall there may be a goal for a certain culture, and we may be able to find that certain groups are doing really well in certain areas and not so much in others, and we may be able to see where things are breaking down at different, at different, across different parts of the organization. And sometimes it can be at the leadership level, but other times it's, it's at lower levels of the hierarchy where potentially that intern, as you talked about, and I think it is so valuable, the use of AI to be able to really understand. And even we've seen this in M&As. We've seen this in so many culture things where the assumptions up front don't actually pan out. They're not. There's a level of information that's correct, but there's so much more underneath, so that can help us to start to take those silos and tear those silos down. So
absolutely. And actually one other thing too that reminds me of, it works both ways. One is like areas where there's resistance or people aren't, or there's, let's say, conflicting behaviors or ways of thinking to the culture you want to create. But from the M&A perspective, there are bright lights too, where you do get the quick wins, the lessons learned. I once was doing a global reorg, and what I realized was, being the global change person, here's the plans and whatever, and it turned out that one of the regions they did something a bit different that was better actually. And it was more powerful to the other regions that another region just like them had done it and it had worked. So it was a validator. But if we had AI to actually articulate what they had done, I think I could have responded more quickly and better, because it raises up areas of disconnect, but it also raises up areas of benefits too. And again, in a merger, one of the things you to support the change is to demonstrate that it was a good reason to merge together, and that whether it's complementary or our skill sets or whatever, I think AI could do a really good job of seeing those more clearly than our manual approach that we would do, in the past.
Yeah, and it just is about giving our change leaders better tools and better insights. I think that's the key. And when you think about leaders and the role of the leader and their role in using AI for culture change, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, that's a good one, because it's change is different now, and there's some foundations that are the same. And one thing I find for leaders in any change, and AI, especially since there's a technology component, it's hot, it's new, and we have an existing skill set that might not be digitally friendly or literate. The first one, I think, and there's a lot of potential fear that could be had as well, that I think, first of all, they have to give the vision of, and especially let's keep it to culture change. What is the purpose of AI in culture change? So the vision, what does it mean? What does the future look like? And again, it's dispelling. We have a bunch of robots, going around as managers with us doing things like all those horror stories, but really painting a clear picture of what is the purpose, why are we doing this, how will it be better? And I think that there's three things that an employee needs when something like this comes on. And the first one is, why are we doing it as an organization? Why bring in AI to support our culture change? Two is, what's the benefit for you? So that the WIFM, why would I want it? Like new skill set, better literacy, more competitive skills. And then kind of what do I need to do to make this successful? So, and I think the leaders leave that one out a lot about, well, what is the expectation of me in this culture change enabled by AI? So that's the first one. The second one was a big one, which is the leader embracing AI, and which is, as you had mentioned, and it's that, to have a leader who says, yes, it's really important for AI to enable our culture change, and I've never been on a platform, is sending the wrong signal. So is that individual, are they actually jumping in and going first, as leaders should do, and hopefully not completely succeeding, because it shows that it's a safe test and learn environment. And also, I think that the third one for me is the taking away the barriers with anything like this. There's always going to be, oh, we've got cybersecurity concerns, so we should never do it instead of addressing the cybersecurity concerns, or our processes won't support it, or whatever it is. There's always reasons why it can't be done, but they've got the power to just deal with them and reconfigure the environment so it would support it. And then the last one I would say is really about understanding resistance, listening to employees, understanding potentially their fears or limitations, and then demonstrating an ability to neutralize them by what it's support or whatever, or rewards to make it happen. So I think it's very similar to any large initiative, but I've just summarized that leaders go first, and they change the organization in order to create the environment where people can actually learn a new skill, and in this case, to the betterment of the culture.
Yeah, yeah, and as you were speaking, one of the things that comes to mind for me is it's that balance of AI and institutional knowledge and institutional culture.
Yeah.
Because one of the things we're seeing sometimes is leaders go all in that, hey, in AI we trust, and there's so much great institutional knowledge within the organization. We need to use the data and insights, but we also need to value what people are seeing and what they know historically, and really balance those two. And I think having leaders stress that throughout the organization is optimal as well.
No, so true. And I think as what we've seen in our work is that if the leaders aren't there for this, nothing changes for very
Yeah.
long. And then again, if they're not there, the next glittering prize will be the one that they'll support, hopefully. So you get a project team trying to do something that has no credibility, which is wasted resources, and I think very poor for the culture, especially if it's a culture change initiative.
Indeed. Yeah, indeed. And for those that are joining us, please do continue to put your questions. We'll be getting the questions fairly soon. And Phil, one of the things that I've been asked, and I'd love to get your opinion on, is, do you think AI can be misused for culture change?
Wow. Yeah, I do. And I think it's just from just reading a lot in this territory and seeing how it's being used. And again, it's the using the hammer to try and screw in a sort of a screw. Like I think there's misuse with lack of education, understanding for the limitations, as you said. And I think it is that balance between that institutional human knowledge and what this tool can do. And one concern, I was talking to someone a year ago, so this is still when it was fairly new, and they were talking about AI as being a surveillance tool. And again, look at the pandemic, like the whole mouse screening. But what this would do, it was taking a look at the social network. So how often were you sending emails? What was the content? How long they were? But the intent wasn't to enable further communication and looking at the bright stars of communication and learning what the stars do and then training people to do that so that they were being effective. It was to catch the people in their view that weren't working hard enough. And I think it was, oh my goodness. And I said, I can't believe that you'd say that, because your assumption is that there's one variable that will detect whether people are working or not. And that is really the amount of communication they have. What about the individual contributor in research and development? No answers, of course, coming for it. But I think surveillance with the wrong intention, with the wrong assumptions, is a really big killer. Another one is, I call it deflection. And what I've seen is, and this is sort of a technology component too, is almost like you're deflecting accountability for the decisions that are taken, and you're actually putting that accountability on a technology solution enabler. So an example of that would be saying, hey, it's not me, but this is what the conclusion of our AI tool had said, and therefore we're going to act upon that. And but it's not me, because I wouldn't do it because I'm a nice guy. And I think it's total. it's total removal of accountability and responsibility, but I've seen it and then I think what happens if you use the AI tool without the overlay of human knowledge, you train yourself to just implement whatever the system says, and it has biases and it doesn't have full context. So I think that would be a big one for me. And then the last one, Tim, would be data privacy, would be real full transparency of what we're actually mining, what we're really looking. And a very, very small example of it, and it happened 2 weeks ago to me, and it's kind of an innocent one, but I think it has broader overtones if you looked at it more for performance data. And I was with a client, and we're having a meeting, a virtual meeting, and they have a software tool that will document the whole meeting, and it will summarize, here's the big decisions and whatever. A productivity tool, which is great. But what this one did is it didn't say when it was on. So the kind of the banter at the beginning of the conversation, I'd said to someone, "Hey, do you know, did we meet 12 years ago at this, session I was giving, and then we're talking about, people we knew." But when you know it, that all the notes went to everybody that was in the meeting with the banter of, and thank goodness it was, hey, 6 degrees of separation with, Kevin Bacon. But it could you only imagine that it wasn't that? And it turns into a hot mic, or it turns into, and again, it was so innocent and it was amusing, but I couldn't help thinking of the implications of what AI can do when you're not aware of the transparency and the data that you're not aware of, and it's being used for purposes that you're not aware of. I think that could be devastating. How about you?
Yeah, I think as you said, for leaders, they play such a big role from a culture perspective, and thinking about how we're going to transform and how we're going to use, and that transparency and that openness and that trust, and turning those values into reality and tying them back to AI is just so important. And for me, I think three times this week I've had when I finished a meeting, I've heard Siri say, "Oh, thank you." And meanwhile, I didn't even think Siri was on. Of course, I'll have to check my settings, and somehow, I guess Siri is listening. But for an employee at all levels, it's really important that they understand. They understand, again, the why. They understand what you're doing, how you're doing it, what impacts it is it going to have. And I reflect back to, you were talking about during the pandemic and companies putting in things that people just didn't trust. I remember there was people who, as a workaround, when they were leaving their desk, would put their PowerPoint on presentation mode, so it would look like they were presenting. And again, just a workaround. And if you're building a culture and a new culture of trust, it really goes both ways around. Let's talk through. Let's understand what this looks like at all levels of the organization. Let's communicate effectively. Let's mitigate trust and work together. And I think that's so essential.
Great.
Thank you. And we know that adopting AI is a change, and we're seeing more and more stories about that. But what, for you, when you think about what has to be true for people to accept AI-enabled culture support?
Yeah, Tim, it is a change within the change. So even it implies that the AI is part of the organization, and that it's fully working and effectively and part of the culture. And I would say that the biggest one for me, and this is based on many mistakes I've made in the past, is really being certain that there's leadership alignment about everything with bringing AI in. And then let's just say the adoption is going to be done through culture change, and this is the first one. But really, really aligned. And I just found so many times if I don't check, I'm always disappointed, and it's a risk. And even an organization I was working with a couple of weeks ago, and it was a risk conversation. But the first thing is, okay, let's define risk. And when you know it, based on people's experience and what they've done and their knowledge, there were about 8 different definitions of what risk is. So if we didn't really define, are we aligned on the outcomes? Are we defined on the budget for this? Are we aligned on the governance and the cyber risk and what we're going to do there on everything? And I think that would be number one, even before you go really. And I think often leaders say, because they're busy and they're, yeah, we're aligned. But more often than not, they're not, because they bring different skills and different experiences. The second one would be a technology enablement, because there is a technology component in it. It does require some form of governance. It does some form of, even if it's by licenses, about what platform is going to be used. But don't rush it and just assume it's, hey, everyone go. And again, this is an exaggeration. Just go on Claude AI and we'll all be good. But there's more thinking about this because it's connected with all the different other platforms. The third one would be the outcomes. If I could kind of double click on that one, what are we really trying to accomplish here? And again, could we accomplish it in just a manual approach? And I think what we've talked about, Tim, is you can't. Like you could, but you're not going to get the deeper insights. You're not going to be able to sort of aggregate different groups and look at them differently. But I think you have to ask that question. And then the last one is which is near and dear to our hearts, is the change management support. I remember once early in it was with Polaroid, and it was early in my career, like this is 30 years ago. And the technology implementation was actually technology, from using, paper and pen to having your first, system in. And I remember we were having this conversation with a sales group, and I looked over at someone who had just terror on their faces. And of course, because they hadn't bought their own PC and whatever. But what I would say is just really understand the support to do it from the Organization for Transparency and leading in, and the understandings that we're saying, but also the training and the safe environment where people can practice, and a test and learn culture. We won't always get it right, but we'll continuously learn. I think there's a lot of work there to do it well. And that would be my recommendation. So that has to be true, because anything else is going to be the flavor of the month that fails.
Yeah. And we've seen enough flavor of the months that let's see culture transformation from end to end, and let's see it sustained and not. I have a few more questions for you, but I want to jump to a question we've received from the audience. So thank
you so much, the person who offered it. Thank you.
And the question is there a generational gap among AI users at work? New graduates from college seem more comfortable using AI in an AI-enabled corporate culture. What approach is best to promote AI engagement among existing workers who are new to AI in the workplace?
Great. Oh, this is great. And yeah, I think even from usage, and even if you look at another kind of analogy, if you look at sort of gaming and gaming over from Nintendo to what's happening now, and depending on where you got in or not getting in at all, pretty much like me, you have different skills, comfort levels, and everything in doing it. So I think there is a usage gap that you have to address. And I think there's some tactics. And if you remember back, unfortunately, they're no longer here. And if you live in Canada, there was a company called Markwork Warehouse, and they had clothing, and started off as more in construction clothing and then more into sort of medium fashion. And they were going into a digital technology change. So things would be up in the cloud. You wouldn't have manual copies. Everything would be digitized. And they realized that there is that gap, generational gap in doing it. So they took a multi-prong approach. One is they took the people who were digital natives and they made them the supports for the people who had not had that experience. So that co-creation, Tim, that we talked about, is they took it, those new recruits, and they became the coaches for the people who were new. One is it made the interns feel great, but also it made it a lot safer for people to really go, well, how do I actually use this, and what's a prompt in this case? Two is they profiled the leaders going through the transition, because a lot of them were not well pronounced in digital work. So they actually used it as case studies. So, the struggling Phil that's going along, that gave permission for those to do it. The quick wins, the use cases of, hey, this is what, Raj has been able to do, who's the whiz. Now, how can we create a sort of a job guide to do it? So co-creation, one acknowledgement to do it too is that it's not a bad thing, that it's just you're on the capability curve at a little earlier on. But to make it a cultural initiative, bringing them up and seeing people who might have been really fearful and struggling, and actually profiling them, doing something really good with the report that they never would have used AI for. And I think it also suggests this isn't a 3-month transition. This is one that is incremental going forward. So those would be some of the tips from Mark's Work Warehouse and others.
Yeah.
But don't make it a crime that you're not on the change curve yet. Even kind of celebrate how we're going to support you to get you up to speed again. And when you're up to speed, celebrate that.
Yeah, that's great advice. And one of the things for me that comes forth is when we were doing some work for a hospital network, and one of the things around that was we were able to leverage those that were newly out of college or university as super users. So instead of frustrating, say, nurses or who really were struggling, they had somebody now on their team who could help and support and guide from that perspective. And what it did as well was, the secondary benefit was, it actually brought more bonding within teams, because again, we all come with different strengths and different abilities. So thank you for that. Thank you for that question. It's great. If there's additional questions, please do type them in. I've got a question for you, Phil, and it's around employee resistance. And do you feel that AI can detect employee resistance better than us, better than individuals, or even people managers?
Yeah, well, I think we know that, regardless of how well the change is done, or even the benefits for people, there will always be resistance, which is sort of a human trait, whether it's the fight, flight, freeze, appease, amygdala hijack, or, the fear, or even actually, hey, I didn't invent it, and the way I would have done it is no longer the way we're going to do it, because AI is going to support it. So it's very, very natural. And what I would say is, I don't think it depends on how you define better. I would say deeper for sure. And I think deeper, again, it's that data analysis. And what I find is if you look at, there's sort of a passive resistance, where Phil doesn't go to training. So you can't get me, like, I had my hand in the sand. I wasn't trained. Well, we've offered you 3 programs, and each time you've declined 3 minutes before the session. So that's kind of like, I'm not going to get on the train resistance. And then there's sort of active resistance, which could be even close to sabotage, or I'm going to disprove this is happening. And I think with the ability of AI to look at the lot of data, I think you get a faster view of the extent of the resistance, if you assume that we'll always have resistance, and more examples when that happens. And one thing I've never been able to manage when resistance comes in is the silent assassin. So it's the person that agrees to everything. Hey, I think AI for culture is great. Can't wait till this happens. That's going to be amazing. And they go back to their team and says, I give it 6 months, or I don't think this is really good. And leaders, people fall they're leaders, right? And they're hard to catch because every time you see them, they're doing the behaviors and showing the thinking that you look. So you're going, high five, Phil's in, but he's not. He's a silent assassin. And I think with, again, it goes back to that computation of kind of communication. And, hey, the 6 things that Phil has said about AI is it's that he said to his team is, it's not as good as human, or they tend to be profiling where AI was slightly inaccurate because they don't have the contextual things, but they never say the benefits. So that's that active piece. So I think deeper, yes, I think we can see, as humans, we can see resistance, but not, you can't be everywhere at every time. And again, I think your behaviors will show how you really are in the end. But I think AI can definitely detect it and give more examples of this is how you're obstructing, or you didn't let your team go to training, like all those things that you might miss or take longer. But what about you, Tim? Because I know resistance is an important one.
We're seeing it. We're seeing it early. We're seeing it before it often becomes a problem, and we're seeing, and we're able to pivot. And it's been really fascinating to be able to see through sentiment and understand where those pockets of resistance are at that point, and to be able to start to put in updated interventions. And what we're finding is it's a real risk reducer on programs. You're still going to have those sleuthy things where yeah, and then deer in the headlights, hey, I'm not but overall it really is, as we build trust through AI, we really are getting a good understanding of what are some of the points of resistance that need to be tackled earlier, and segmented into different areas or functions or locations. So
Great.
When you think about, are there any watchouts for you that come to mind for using AI to enable culture change?
Yes, there are definitely, and I think it is, again, the newness of AI, how it can be used. And one would be to profile the technology too much, because part of bringing in something like AI, there's a sell component. Hey, AI is great. Hey, this is great. Whatever. And to oversell it for what really is its intended, which goes to the one, be really clear on why you're bringing it in. But to say it will do everything, it will slice bread, it will do great, and hey, we'll be 30% more efficient in our culture initiatives and whatever. And when I start hearing that with no demonstrated, and is that a goal? Yeah, because don't say this is going to be great if it's not a goal, and if you don't know whether it's a goal, you haven't focused on your goal. So don't make this as it will do everything, as you said, Tim, because I think the natural sell of bringing something in is you oversell, and it creates fear, and it underdelivers where it had nothing to do with the technology. It's just what you said about it. Two is that I think there is a very important governance piece about this. Like, it's just not jumping onto a platform like we do. Actually, I'm going to my dentist after this, and about do we take a tooth out or not? And I'm going to give 3 platforms AI views of whether they should do it or not. Poor guy, he doesn't know what's going to hit him. But the thing is, be really. There's a governance thing. There's the cybersecurity piece. There's what to use it for, what not to use it for. It's the protection of data. There's some platforms now that if you load up data, it's going to use that for learning purposes. Do we support that or not? So I think that would be at the governance piece, is the watch out. And the third one is, I think it goes back to the flash in the pan, really underestimating what this would be for culture change. And it's a culture change within a culture change. One is bringing AI in, and 2 is having it to enable culture and culture enablement and building. But really, this isn't just, oh, just do it, it'll be easy. It requires change management support. It requires resources. It's not just technology. And I think it's so easy with the flash in the pan. This is the glittering prize, is to want the benefits, but not wanting to do the work to get those benefits. So that would be the watch out. Hey, I read this Harvard Business Review article that said, all good leaders are bringing in AI within 6 weeks. Great, you're wrong, but it happens all the time, and you don't provide the resources for people, or you definitely don't make it co-creative, which is the best solution for any change.
Indeed, indeed. And this has been absolutely fascinating. Um, I'd love to get your closing thoughts. Um, any advice you have for organizations wanting to leverage AI for culture change?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And this has been great. Thank you so much, and thank you to the person who provided the great question. And what I would say is that often I think with organizations, they can have a habit of looking at every change initiative as being separate, like it's a separate project, and we're just talking about that, whether it's a good thing or not. But we're not talking about all of them as that portfolio of, our organization is going through multiple things. So, and we have resources to apportion depending on the importance to the organization. So that the first one would really be with the leadership team, is to really see the role of culture, AI enabling culture within the broad portfolio of what they're doing and how important it is, and does it really justify the resources to do it. Because if you don't do it, something else will come up, and then you lose support for leadership, which is, I think, worse than if you didn't start at all. Another thing I would say is that the leaders having to go first is, people do what their leaders do. So if the leadership team isn't embracing this, then again, I think their resistance could be the biggest form of resistance there. And the last one is really looking at this as being something that will take time, and we're learning and creating the environment. If we really are serious about bringing this in, and we are really serious about learning from it, it's going to be okay when we make mistakes. It's going to be okay when AI comes out with conclusions that aren't appropriate, because they didn't have, because that's part of honing the skill of using it as a tool. So those would be my three recommendations if you were going to engage in something like this.
Oh, thank you, Phil. And I just want to thank you for all of your insights.
Sure.
Just amazing, amazing thought leaders, and I'm taking some incredible insights away from this. I do want to let everyone know that we'll make the recording available to anyone who wishes to revisit the session or to share with colleagues. So we'll look to do that in the coming days. And tomorrow we've got another session coming, another webinar, because this is Neurodiversity Celebration Week. And so tomorrow, same time, the session is the neuroscience of change and thriving in the fast-paced world. So hopefully you can join us. And again, Phil, thank you, and thank you for those that were on the call today. Everyone, have a great day, and looking forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.
Thanks
for now.
Great opportunity. Bye, everyone.